Okay, welcome. I'm guessing, or should I say, anticipating a couple of more people joining us late because I did say on Monday, those of you who were in the Zoom class Monday, that today two of the slides are important enough that we're going to finish with Islamic art, right? And two of the slides on today's, short list, we did four, right? I think we are going to start with the Court of the Lions at Alhambra. So we have four more, and two of them, including that one. And then the most probable, I will even say, of all the slides for this whole week that could easily or very likely will be on either the idea or slide essay part of the final would be the last slide, the Taj Mahal. So those of you who have logged in and are here and take notes or make notes of whatever method you use are going to be in better shape if that slide is on, or either of these two that I'm not going to cut from the study list. I always tell you that when we get to those slides. Okay, so at this point, let me start. I always do this with any questions. Does anybody have any questions about your grades? I'm pretty sure I've sent everyone who turned in their midterm back the grade with the explanation of how you got that grade. Of course, if you got an A, there's not much to say except great, congratulations, good job. But if you missed a few points, I always explain what those, where you were missing those points. And of course, extra credit, again, I've said it several times, no one's come close. One person has 20, I think is the most of anyone out of the possible 60 maximum points of extra credit. So you guys all still have plenty of opportunities or room for adding to your point totals if you choose. Okay, before we get started with this slide, I'm kind of thinking surely before the first slide, one or two more people will join us. Anybody have any questions at all about anything relating to anything in class or your grades? Anybody? As usual, I'll stick around afterwards. We may be able to end early today. It's hard to say. Just depends on if there's questions, but I think there's a good chance we can end about 10 minutes early, and I don't think anyone would object, right, to that. Okay, now I could be wrong, but my memory is that we did not do this slide. We were on it, and I decided not to rush through it, right? At the end of the class Monday, I was about to give you the information on this slide, correct? The Court of the Lions, plural, of course, Court of the Lions at Alhambra. That's part of the title because there's more than one of these sites in Spain. The location is Spain and the date is 1380. And so Alhambra, which is the name of not the town it's in, but the name of the site. It's a World Heritage Site. I'll explain. It's a really unique spot. I spent all day there once when I was in Spain. I'll spell it again. Court of the Lions at Alhambra. Alhambra. Maybe a couple of you know there's a water company, I think it's still around, that delivers bottled water, at least it used to in Southern California, plus a town in Southern California outside LA city limits. I think it is a suburb LA, named Alhambra after this place. But that's not part of the meaning of this slide, obviously. Okay, I said this when we started, and I'll repeat it. This is a slide that's very important. Of the four we're seeing today, it's one of the two that I am definitely not going to cut from the study list. Okay, so first of all, what are we looking at? We're looking at a courtyard in the Sultan's compound in the last capital city of Moorish Spain. So I'll say that again. We're looking at one of the many, many courtyards, dozens of them, one of the many courtyards in the Sultan's compound in the last Moorish capital of Spain. So what was that capital? It was the city of Granada. Again, now that's, I think it's called Granada Hills. It's a major suburb in the valley, in LA Valley, San Fernando Valley. If you from Southern California, where you spent time there, these places. Named again after the town. So I'll say that again. The actual town this is in is Granada. You don't have to worry about the spelling, but I'll spell it for you. Because if it's not on the syllabus, you don't get points off if you write a word and it's misspelled on your essay answers, okay? As with your papers, same thing. Okay, but I'll spell it Granada, G-R-E-N-A-D-A. So the city of Granada was the last Moorish capital, or the last capital, I should say, the last capital of Moorish Spain. And this complex of dozens, and it is dozens of buildings, was like, I would just write it this way, a city within a city. Granada was a pretty good sized town, being the capital of a, major kingdom. Of course, it would be not a small town, but separate from, on a hill above the city of Granada, that's where this is located, on a hill above the city, is this whole town or city within a city where the Sultan lived with all of his thousands, and it was over 10,000, historians have verified, people that lived in this complex. That would include his dozens of wives, all of their children, their in-laws, of course, their extended families, his ministers and advisors and their families, all of his bodyguards, all of the religious authorities who conducted, there were several mosques in this complex. And then, of course, there were medical facilities and a library and meeting rooms for meeting people from other kingdoms. Yeah, you can imagine, it just was literally hundreds of rooms in dozens of buildings. And each of those buildings had a courtyard like the one we're looking at. Okay, so that's the overview of what we're looking at. But this particular courtyard, maybe one or two of you might, if you were, following the lecture on Monday, have thought of this. Wait a minute, didn't we say on Monday that Muslims have a religious belief against depicting any living creatures? That's on mosques, first of all. This isn't a mosque. There are mosques in this complex, but this is not. This is one of the residential compounds where people lived. The Sultan had his own private, separate palace. So some of the people that lived there would have resided or lived inside these rooms. So it's not a violation, of Islamic law to depict animals on buildings other than mosques, but also they're not Islamic. They are sitting in a courtyard of an Islamic compound, but they were brought here from ruined Byzantine temples. Lions, of course, in a Byzantine temple, that's Christian, right? Remember, Byzantines were early Christians. That's not against the Christian teaching. So that wouldn't have violated even if it had been in front of a mosque. So for both those reasons, there's no way that these lions being used like this in front of an entrance to a Muslim compound are in any way against their law, their religious teachings, because it's not a mosque, and they weren't even carved, these lions, by Muslim artists in the first place. So you get a little closer and you can see that the funniest looking lions, they don't have any eyes. I don't know if they ever did. You can see their teeth. Okay, but here's the most important fact about this compound, besides what it is. I already described that, what its purpose was, is that this is unique. There is no other site on earth like this, because every single courtyard has a different water feature. So there are dozens of unique or individual, if you want to write it that way, water features. There are waterfalls, there are streams, there are fish ponds, there are lily ponds, there are fountains that spray up into the air 30 feet. Some of them, this one doesn't, it's just a drinking fountain. But in other words, each one of the water features has a different design, a different style. Unique. There is no other place on earth like that. So that's why this whole complex is on UNESCO, the UN, you could just say UN World Heritage list. It's absolutely a World Heritage site. And then the other things are what mark it as Islamic are, there are Arabic prayers. You see them here, right, across the top of this portico. It was a column porch, right? You remember that word comes from the Greek. Temples, we already covered. So just like mosque, in this case, they chose, for whatever reason, though it's not a mosque, this building, to put Arabic prayers. And then the pointed arches are an invention of Muslim architects. They invented them, not French Gothic cathedral architects who, we'll see later, they borrowed the pointed arches from Islam. So it has two traditional Islamic features here. And then the horseshoe, the third one is the horseshoe arches, like we saw, remember, on Monday in the Great Mosque at Cordoba, which was also a Moorish design building. That was an actual mosque. This is just a residential structure. So that's pretty much the whole meaning of this. We'll add one other thing, that this site has two two things about it that make it still one of the largest or most, used to say, most popular, there we go, most popular tourist sites in Europe. Before the pandemic, I don't know now, of course, it could have changed, but before the pandemic, up until whatever, 2020, about 1 million people a year would visit this site from all over the world. And almost every successful architect of the last century or more has come here. Frank Lloyd Wright came here more than once. Julia Morgan came here when she was studying in Paris. Bernard Maybeck came here after he was already teaching architecture. Frank Gehry has been here more than once, right? And many other famous living architects. So in other words, the way to summarize that is not only is it on the UN World Heritage List and a popular tourist site, it is a Mecca, I would say, or a pilgrimage for most successful, and not all of them, but most successful architects know about how unique this is, and they come here to study it, to be inspired by it. It's that influential to this day. It's been a museum, by the way, for well over 100 years, open to the public. It's an historic museum. Okay, and then the last fact I'll say about it is that the Muslims who designed it, do say the architects who designed this, wanted it to reflect their image of paradise, which is their word for heaven. You could say heaven if you want, but the word that Muslims prefer is paradise. Now, how does this reflect the concept of paradise? Because to Muslims, paradise is a place with plenty of shade and cool breezes and plenty of water. So it's a cool place, we'll put it that way, a cool place with plenty of shade and plenty of water, as opposed to what almost all the countries they lived in were deserts or very hot, like Spain is, hot and dry places. So for them, paradise was the opposite. And this has all those three features. So it's the last fact you should mention about the meaning. It has plenty of shade, the cool breezes, the way it's designed, passing through the hallways and the open rooms, right? And then, of course, like I just said, with all those fountains, there's plenty of water here. So it has the three features that Muslims consider a basic elements in when they die and go to paradise that they will enjoy, of course. All right, that's plenty on the meaning. Let's do a formal analysis. It's balanced, as you can see from this slide, totally symmetrical, left to right. But because the roofs, right, each of the peaked gables, those are called, but just say the roof lines, are narrower at the top. And then, of course, there's no gables or no peaks around either side of those porches. So just, in other words, it's unbalanced or weighted toward the bottom, of course. Colors are almost entirely warm on the buildings themselves. The red clay tile, the honey color, it actually is a color of honey. It's a kind of stone. I don't know if it's marble, but down below these columns are marble. However, some of them have some white. So the columns vary, but the columns are more cool than you can see here, they're mixtures. So they're a mixture of cool and warm. And the fountain is cool. It's cool gray color. Is there simulated texture? Yes, plus the real texture. There's both. The lions have simulated texture because, again, remember, they were carved by Christian artists before the Muslims used them for this fountain. But there is the real texture of stone, right? Smooth marble on the columns and the lower part of the walls, and then the rough texture of carved stone, and that's all carved line. So the line here is all carved on both the individual lions, you can see on their faces, and here on the walls, the upper part of the walls. So the line is all carved. And the shade is, of course, just the natural shadows from the sunlight. And then we have, the colors are warm on the tile too, of course, up above. So most of these, the walls of the structure itself and the roofs are warm, except near the bottom of some columns. The rhythm is obvious with the pointed and horseshoe arches alternating here. Mostly horseshoe in the middle. I'm sorry, I meant pointed arches there on the middle on the porch and horseshoe arches on the sides. And the columns, of course, are this exact same shape, and the lions are. So there's plenty of rhythm. Is it stable or dynamic? Well, like most architecture, it's both. The walls, the columns, they're stable. The arches are dynamic. The fountain, of course, is also dynamic, and the roof lines are. So it's both. The largest mass would be depends on how you want to break it down, but I would say it's the side sections or wings, if you want to say that, on the left and right in this photo. They're longer. It's a long rectangular courtyard. So the side wings or side walls, and then the back walls. There's another porch behind the photographer when that person took the picture. That's identical. So that's part of what makes it symmetrical. But the third largest mass would be the porches or porticos, and then the fountain. And then the last thing for space, these are long open rooms and covered courtyards, shaded, right? Walkways. I meant to say shaded walkways. Not the courtyard isn't covered, but the sidewalks, side walkways rather, are shaded. They're long and narrow, and the rooms inside are long and open, and they have a ceiling of about 15 feet. So that's the real space. Okay, let's move on to the next lesson here. I showed you this last week when we covered early Christian art, and I showed you my slides of Istanbul. This is the next must-know on the syllabus. It's the Blue Mosque, 2 words, Blue Mosque. I think most people know that's Mosque. Istanbul, that's the city it's in, right? Istanbul, Istanbul. And the date is 1557. So why is this called the Blue Mosque? Well, because it's built of a rare stone called blue stone, taken from mountains in central Turkey. So hundreds of miles away, the stone was brought from inside the interior, you could say, of Turkey, not nearby. The stone had to be imported from hundreds of miles away. And so because of the color of the stone, it's a very light, kind of bluish gray, actually, but they call it blue stone. And it is also the largest mosque in Istanbul. And it is 2/3. This is an important part of the meaning. And I'll repeat it when we do the formal elements on space. It's 2/3 of the height of the dome of the Hagia Sophia, which is right next door. In fact, in this slide, it's misleading. I know some people get confused by this, but this is not one of the minarets for the Blue Mosque. These 4 minarets are attached to the Blue Mosque. Look carefully, you can see that. This one's not part of the Blue Mosque. This one belongs to the Hagia Sophia. So how you can write that is, next door, this mosque was built, next door to the Hagia Sophia, which I've already covered, was the original mother church of the Greek Orthodox religion or Byzantine religion, which is now a mosque again. It was converted into a mosque and then became a museum, and it's a mosque again. So this minaret was added by the Turkish conquerors who conquered Constantinople, made it into the city it now is called Istanbul. So that's not part of the Blue Mosque. These 4 minarets are. Why does it even matter? It's an important detail because every royal mosque has 4 minarets, no more, no less, unless they've been knocked down in an earthquake, but they were built with 4 minarets. Well, that tells us this was designed and built by and for, well, not designed by, but built for and used by the Sultan, his family, and all of his guests. Well, there is no sultan anymore, so it's open to the public, and mostly people living there. Almost everyone in Istanbul is Muslim now. They can use it. I think I mentioned I went in there with my girlfriend at the time during a hurricane to get out of the danger zone of the wind and rain, and it was really beautiful inside. So all you have to know for the meaning notes now are: this is a royal mosque built by a sultan who had ruled during, or did rule during, the golden age of the Turkish Empire. And the Turkish Empire is one that just never gets the attention it deserves unless you've taken world history or world art from some other teachers. But Turkish Empire was huge. It was one of the largest empires in the world for 500 years. They ruled all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, and a good chunk of Europe, southeastern Europe. So they were a massive or major empire, and their golden age, the height, in other words, when we say golden age, we mean the period of their strongest, most powerful, and wealthiest era. during that period, this sultan, his name was Suleiman the Magnificent. You don't need to have his name, but if you want to put it in as part of the meaning, I'll spell it for you slowly. Suleiman, Suleyman. Suleiman, that was his first name, the Magnificent, was their sultan, the Turkish Empire ruler, sort of like an emperor, right? During the Golden Age, and he ordered this mosque to be built. But why did he do that? Because he was not trying to compete. This is an important detail, the last part of the meeting now. He wasn't trying to compete with the scale, the size, or even you could say the magnificence of the Hagia Sophia. He said, that is not for me to do. Allah or God wouldn't like that. It would be ego to show off and build a bigger mosque than the Hagia Sophia, which, remember, had been a Christian church, and then by this time it was a mosque. So he didn't want to compete with it. So he deliberately told this design, the architect designed this, to keep it smaller. So that's why it's only 2/3 of the height, the dome, which is, we'll get to in just a minute what that, numbers of the height are, how many feet, but you can just keep it simple to finish the notes on the meaning of this slide, is that it was deliberately designed to be only 2/3 the total size and height of the Hagia Sophia, which was by then a mosque next door. He did not want to show off, you could say, or compete, or to show his ego. He was trying to be humble, in other words. Okay, so the last thing is, by the way, where is it? Well, I said Istanbul, but you don't have to write this, but I like showing this close-up view here. And that's Asia, and that's the other side of the strait, that, right, the channel between the two halves of Istanbul. I think I told you this last week. Istanbul is the only city on earth that spans 2 continents. Half of it's in Europe, that's where this is, the European side. And then the other half of the city across the channel is in Asia. And that was after the Muslims conquered it. They expanded the city's limits into Asia. So now it's unique in the world, city on 2 continents. Okay, formal analysis. Let's do the space first. I said it was 2/3, but that specifically means the dome is 120 feet high, which is exactly 2/3 of 180, almost down to the last foot, or just say very close. It might be a foot or 2 off. So it's just say 120-foot tall dome. And the interior of this is one large open domed room, which has a number of side rooms. They're in the apses. Remember the word apse, that is a word that you almost certainly end up needing to use if you want to get full credit on the final, because it applies to this kind of building. And some mosques, many mosques use apses, but the first use of them was in Christian churches, the Byzantines. Plus the dome. The dome is resting on the corners of the building, which are right here, here, and here, and then one behind this dome. So that's a dome on pendants. It's the same style of dome as the Byzantine architects created. And of course, on the church, the Hagia Sophia right next door is the same thing, a dome on pendants. So this is I'll say it again, the space is one large open domed room with 120-foot high ceiling with smaller side sections or rooms. They open up off the edges of this larger dome space. All right, and then the rhythm is pretty obvious. The windows are all round, at least surprisingly not pointed arches like most mosques are, but the rhythm is a repeated round arch windows. Each dome, the main dome plus the ones on the apses, plenty of rhythm there. And of course the minarets create rhythm. It's stable on each minaret. Remember, this is not one of the original mosques minarets. These 4 are. They're all upright, so they're stable and round, of course. So both stable and dynamic, and the domes are totally dynamic. But the corners of the building, as usual with almost all the other buildings except Frank Gehry's, right? Those are right angle. So it's both stable on the corners and minarets and dynamic on the domes and the windows. And you could say the spires if you want to. That's what these are. Whoops, pointed the wrong one. The color is cool. It's a light blue, bluish gray if you prefer, because it kind of veers often between blue and gray, but it's considered blue, more blue. Hence the name blue. mosque. And that's a cool color, as is the off-white on the walls itself. So it is not, there's no warm colors unless you count these finials, and you could because they were added later. These are gold, and that's of course a warm color. The largest mass, it actually is the dome, even though it might not look like it. You might think it's the outer walls, but the dome in this one goes all the way down to here. And that's a pretty massive space, having looked at it from inside. So the largest mass is the dome, the main dome. And then it would be probably the minarets or the largest apses. So those would be the second and third largest masses. And the modeling is just the shadows from the sun, natural modeling. There is no carved or painted line visible here, but there is visual line, as always the case, where the sun creates the outer edges of the windows and on the corners, right? So it has visual line, not carved or painted line. And then let's see, balance, yes, symmetrical. Well, every mosque I've ever seen is symmetrical left to right, and the minarets are placed. Remember, there are 4 of them, not this one here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be symmetrical. But even equal spaces apart. So that makes it balanced left to right, and of course, it's unbalanced toward the bottom. And then the texture is the real rough texture of the stone on the walls. So 3 textures: real smooth glass in the windows and real smooth metal on the domes. Okay, let's go to our, so we are going to end early here, but again, I'll stick around for any questions. However, the last slide.
Could you, sorry, could you repeat the texture one more time?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Of course. Yes, the textures there are 3 real textures, no simulated textures, and those are real rough stone on the walls and the minarets. I should have said both walls and minarets. So it's a good thing you asked. And then real smooth textures on the glass in the windows, or the real smooth texture of glass in the windows. And the third texture, again, it's all real, is the real smooth texture of metal on the domes, all the domes, including the apses. Yeah, that's important. So I'm glad you asked me to repeat that. Anybody else have any questions before we move on from this one? Okay, now the only reason I'm showing you 2 mosques, now I know it could be confusing, but I will cut one of these 2. I'm giving you a promise now, and you can hold me to it because it's being recorded and it'll be on YouTube. Oh, by the way, if you were in class Monday or not, I mean, in class Monday, you might not know that I got way too many things on my plate on Friday, a whole bunch of problems that I don't need to bore you with, that piled up, and I couldn't get to posting the lectures from last week's lectures for both Monday and Wednesday. Didn't get posted until Monday, but they are now. If you missed either of the lectures last week on early Christian Byzantine art, you do want to watch those, because at least one of those slides will be on the final, maybe 2 of them. Okay, with this one, I've said this several times, the last slide in this one, I'm not deciding yet, but one of them will probably be cut, but I'm not making that decision until we do the review, which of course will be the week before final exams, and you do want to be present in that class. So in other words, will give you, I hope, a little helpful break in that you won't have the possible, scenario of 2 very similar looking mosques to have to study and remember which one is which, or create very distinct flashcards for your, notes you have, of course, next to you during the exam. It'll only be one or the other. So I'm not sure which of these 2 I'll cut. So take the notes, in other words, with the assumption that there's a good chance, or some chance that this could be on the final. So this one is the Mosque of Sultan Selim. Mosque, you know how to spell now. Sultan, I think everyone knows it's S-U-L-T-A-N, and Selim was his first name, S-E-L-I-M. Of course, capital S. And the location is just the country, because it's out in the countryside. It's not in a big city. In Turkey, the country Turkey. Just like the food, right? 1575. Okay, now Selim, we'll start with that fact. Selim was the most successful architect in the Turkish Empire during his lifetime. He had many, many commissions, right? That's what they're called when an architect gets an assignment. So he had commissions to design royal palaces or buildings in royal compounds. in the Turkish Empire. That would be, that huge empire that went from Morocco all the way up into, across the coast of North Africa, past Egypt and Arabia, the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, up through Turkey and into Europe. It's a huge empire. So he had buildings all over, at least many parts of the Turkish Empire, but this was his largest mosque. This mosque was his largest. Okay, so it's also unique in a way that I'll explain in a minute. These are the tallest minarets in Turkey. I don't think in the world. In fact, today I know that's not, because they're building these mega mosques in the richest Arab Gulf states. You know what I mean? Trying to outdo each other. Don't write that. I've seen some with 300-foot tall minarets. Who would climb up 300 feet 5 times a day to the top to call prayer? Of course, they do it all electronically now, just like most Christian churches with their bells and things, So here's what she said, starting here from the notes on the meeting. This has the tallest minarets at that time, anyway, at that time, I'll put it that way, in the Turkish Empire. They were 200 feet. Or about, maybe it's 190 or something, it's nearly or about 200 feet. That's taller than any of the minarets that you'll see on any other slides or any other mosque from this period. Again, we're saying during this era of it was during this golden age of the empire, of the Turkish Empire. So this architect was assigned to design many mosques, but this is the most magnificent. Why? It's a royal mosque. Remember, that's part of the meaning. Anytime you see a slide, if this were to be, or the last one, the blue mosque on the funnel, you'd want to mention that, maybe your first fact on the meaning. There are 4 minarets that absolutely verifies the fact that this was built by and for, on the orders of the Sultan for his use with his family and his invited guests. Now it's open to everybody who wants to worship here. And it's also bluestone. Now this is late evening. I think the slide was taken. I did some research on when this was taken. What time of day, when, what year. It's off the internet, of course. So I've never been here. So this is in a rural part, you could say, or central Turkey. City is a rural district. So that's why we don't list the city. It's probably a small town. And people come from all over central Turkey to worship here because it's one of the most magnificent mosques outside of Istanbul in Turkey, the country today of Turkey. So when it was built, though, it was too, because the Sultan wanted the greatest, of course, architect in his empire, right? Sinan, we already spelled his
Wait,
name.
is the city it's like a central thing, or do you say it was like further out?
Yeah, I actually should know what city it's in, but I think I read that, and you don't need to worry about that, what town it's nearest or adjacent to. But at least when it was built, it was in the countryside, and not by how literally out in the middle of nowhere, like a desert. No, there are deserts in Turkey. That's true. There are. So this area was settled. I don't mean it was wilderness, like that out in the boonies, but it was not part of a large city like the ones in Istanbul or Ankara. That's the capital of Turkey now. That was already a big city during the Turkish Empire. It's nowhere near either of those two cities. To just say it's in a smaller, you don't have to say small city, you can just say in central Turkey, not near a big city or not in a big city. Just keep it simple, right? Okay, if you want to do extra credit or you want to write your second paper, it could be interesting because I've seen some beautiful images of this. But I wanted to show you the exterior to give you the point of the fact that the minarets are the tallest at that time in the entire Turkish Empire. And the dome is pretty tall too, but not as tall as the one at the Blue Mosque. It's about 100-foot tall dome. I think you can do the math because that's just about half the height of the minarets, right? So it's about 100-foot high dome. I'll say that again when we get to the formal elements. The only other part of the meaning is the multiple number of apses here and these buttresses. That's what they're called at the edges, right? Outside that they support the weight of the dome. It's a very, very heavy dome. And it's the original one, over 500, about 500 years old. And so these are buttresses, and you don't always see that on a mosque. Some Christian churches use them, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance even, but it's unusual to see them on a mosque. So that's another feature that allows a much heavier, larger dome to be placed on top of this mosque. Okay, and it has more windows than most mosques, but you're not ever supposed to be able to see outside any windows in a mosque. I've mentioned that on Monday again, so I'm repeating that. So the windows aren't for you to look out, they're for light, to make the interior look more light. So that's why it's considered so beautiful. Inside, it's magnificent, lots of decorative detailing and gold, on the walls. And then these are prayer rooms. That's the last part of the meeting. These are prayer rooms off to the side of the mosque itself. But that's part of the design that Sinan, the architect, included these sections here. Remember, we saw that with the great mosque of Isfahan in Persia, or Iran. They also had that mosque, had prayer rooms attached on either side. So does this. So it's still very, very popular, very well used, functioning mosque to this day. All right, that's plenty on the meaning. Let's do a formal analysis. Well, it's balanced as usual. I don't know a single mosque that isn't, left to right, and the placement you see of the minarets is equal distances. So it's completely balanced left to right, and of course unbalanced toward the bottom because of the dome being narrower than the base and the walls below it. The rhythm should be pretty obvious from the minarets themselves, the round arch windows. Now here I think the windows in the walls are pointed. Yeah, they are. So you've got both pointed and rounded windows, so that creates rhythm. And the main dome plus the apses. Yes, there are apses here. There we go. There's one. There'd be one on each corner. There's another one there. Those, of course, are the same shape. For space, I mentioned it already, but I'll say it again. It's one large, open, domed room with about 100-foot high ceiling and several side rooms, or adjacent rooms with under or each apse, you can say, below each apse, or really within. Actually, I misspoke. The apses are actually projections out of the wall, so they're like a niche inside the church. So it's one large open domed room with about 100-foot tall main dome ceiling, and then smaller side areas under or within, each apse. And then also the minarets are about 200 feet. So that's part of the space in this slide. Color's cool, of course, bluish gray, that they call it bluestone. And then the modeling is just the shadows from the sun that are most visible around the windows. And there is carved line here. These minarets actually have lines that are carved into them. I think you can see them enough to be able to say that if it's on the test, on the slide essay. So there is carved line on the minarets. Otherwise, all the other lines are just visual lines. There's no painted or carved line on the walls or the dome. The visual lines, of course, are. I hope this is not, I hate it when I see that little blue circle. I don't know if you guys saw that. Okay, good. I thought it was going to fritz out on me. All right, so let's wrap this up. The largest mass will here to be the minarets, probably, because they're so tall. Then the dome, right? And then, well, actually, if you count this as one mass, it would be the main walls, and then the dome. There we go. That'd be third largest in this case. Because of the proportions. And then it is dynamic, of course, on the domes, all the domes, including the apses, the pointed and round arch windows, dynamic, and the corners of the walls are stable as always. And then the minarets are both, again, because they're tall and straight, but round. I mentioned the shadows, the modeling, stable, dynamic, largest mass, balance. Texture, yes, of course. The texture here is the real smooth texture of glass in the windows, all the windows, right? The real smooth texture of metal on the domes, and the real rough texture of the stone on the walls and the minaret. Okay, and I think I mentioned, yeah, the rhythm. That's everything, right? The colors, cool. Here, there's no gold. Just a quick, you don't have to write this. Yeah, see that? That's because he's silver. Interesting. Maybe they didn't have as much gold in this province of Turkey. You'd think they would use gold if they had it. So there's nothing warm on this structure at all. All right, let's go to the last and most important slide of this week, not just today's lecture, but this whole topic of Islamic architecture. I've said this before, but if it wasn't obvious, make extra special notes or thorough notes on this one. and make a note in your, however you want to do that. My advice, you do what you want, but is to make sure you study this one too. You know, maybe you put an asterisk or a check or something next to your notes. It has a very high probability, I would say, not just possibility, of being on the final. Our last slide for today. Taj Mahal, 2 words, capital T-A-J, and then capital M-A-H-A-L, Taj Mahal. The location is Agra, India. Now, I've had students just write India and they don't get credit for that part of their answer because there are several Taj Mahals in India. This is the most famous one. So it's the city and country. The location is 2 words, Agra, A-G-R-A. And of course you can spell India, the country. The date is 1648. The date is 1648. Now, why am I showing you something that's past 1550? Well, because it's part of the Mughal culture and there are multiple layers of meaning. So I'm going to give you guys a heads up. You're going to have more than 6 facts if you take, thorough notes. I will speak slowly because we're still going to end early. We don't have to rush through this. But I think some of you know this has a really important role in the history of India, and many would say the world. It's one of the most famous buildings on earth. And because of, there's reasons why that's true. And we're going to talk about that. But let's start with the fact that it was designed by a Mughal emperor called the Shah. Actually, we should just say Shah. That's S-H-A-H. You don't have to know his name. You just say the Shah of the Mughal, and that, I think you've all seen that word. Hollywood misuses that word all the time. Remember Harvey Weinstein considered himself a Mughal before he was arrested. M-O-G-U-L. Those would be the ruling class of Muslims who invaded and conquered nearly of all of India. Now, it's not a standalone definition, but it's part of the meaning of this slide, so I'll say it slowly and repeat it. The Mughals were the ruling class of Muslims who invaded and conquered nearly all of India and ruled India for nearly 300, or you could say about 300 years. So they left a huge legacy, and it starts way before this, in the late 13 or early 1400s. So since this was designed by the Mughals who ruled India in the period we're covering, I think it's legitimate to show you this slide and maybe test you on it. Okay, but why is it so famous? Well, one of the facts is it's considered one of the, if not the most beautiful building in the world. Every time a survey is taken, international surveys are taken all the time by different polling organizations, by thousands of people in every country, or at least most countries around the world. The Taj Mahal is voted as one of, if not the most beautiful building on earth. And I think you can see why just looking at this photo. Now, I think I asked this question. No, it was on Monday night when I showed the same slides in my 1.1 Zoom class. But has anybody who's listening now been to India or have friends who've been to India, or any relatives or fellow students? I rarely get students who are from India, once every 2 years. Well, I have had friends of mine, other teachers who've been to India, and I can tell you that this building takes your breath away when you see it. So let's talk about what it's for. Remember, the main part of the meaning of an architectural slide is what was the purpose? Well, this is a remarkably unique purpose. It has a triple purpose, or you could say 3 functions if that's the easier way to write it. This structure had 3 functions. First, a functioning mosque. It always has been, and it still is a functioning mosque. Right, you can see the minarets, and that tells you it's a royal mosque. I just said it was designed by and for, well, he didn't design it. The Shah, Jahan was his name, again, J-E-H-A-N. He hired architects from Persia to design this building, and I'll say why in a minute. Okay, so first, it's a functioning mosque. Second, it's a mausoleum. It's a mausoleum with the actual remains of the deceased empress, the wife of that Shah. Her body is inside this mosque in a sarcophagus, of course. So you can just say it's a mausoleum with the body of the deceased queen or empress, the Shah's deceased wife. And that leads to the third and final purpose, which is unique. This was built or designed to be a memorial to the Shah's undying love for his wife, his deceased wife, of course. I'll say it again. It was built to be a memorial to the Shah's undying love for his deceased wife. Part of the meaning, as some of you know, if you know this already, it was built after she died in childbirth with their 14th child. They'd already had 13 children, and she was only 32. They were childhood sweethearts. They genuinely loved each other. Arranged marriage, oh yeah, and most arranged marriages are not very happy, or at least they're not love matches, but this one was. They were childhood sweethearts. They had, been arranged, to be married since they were children, and they really loved each other. So when she died, he never got over his grief. So the Shah, again, Jahan, he built this as a way of expressing his grief over the loss of her. So that's what makes it so romantic to people around the world. But then one other bizarre footnote is that after he built this, several years later, he was about to start building a second Taj Mahal in black marble. Can you imagine what that would look like? Black marble. It was going to be another monument to his, he did not only get over her death, he actually got more and more depressed after she died. He never, he could have remarried anyone who was eligible and of age, of course, in the entire kingdom of Mughal India. And he just chose never to even think about marrying anyone else. So he was going to build a black marble mosque nearby in the same town in Agra. And when he announced those plans, his son overthrew him, had his father in prison, and executed, saying his father had gone insane and was a danger to the kingdom. So his son took over, probably just an excuse, but whatever. He claimed his father had lost his mind. Well, he certainly was suffering from intense grief, that's obvious. So again, another little footnote that most people don't know about it. And the final fact about there's two more facts about the meaning. What we see in front of it should look familiar to many of you. There's one public site I'll go ahead and say it's in the US Capitol, not the building, the city. And I'll bet some of you, hopefully one or two of you see. If anybody know what I'm talking about, there's a reflecting pool in front of one of the most famous sites in Washington, D.C. Anybody know where that is? Think about it for a second. Martin Luther King made a speech there, very famous civil rights speech, and a whole bunch of other rallies have been held there. Many, in fact, almost every year there's a big rally. Nobody could think of it.
Is it next to the monolith?
Close. I think you know what I'm saying. So yeah, it's the Lincoln Memorial. So you got the right location. Yeah, the monolith is, I think you're talking about the Washington Monument, which is just a big tall obelisk made of marble that was in one of the Spider-Man movies, one of the more recent ones. So don't write into that. Just say it this way. The reflecting pool in front of this mosque is a Muslim invention. We did talk about that when I showed you the slide of the mosque at Isfahan. It's a Muslim invention, but in your notes, you should be even more specific. It's a Persian invention. Of course, the Persians were Muslims. They have been for 1,000 years at least. So by this time, they had been a Muslim culture for centuries. So that means the architects were from Persia. They were imported to India by the Shah to design this incredibly beautiful site. And he would have perhaps asked for a reflecting pool, or who knows why that was added. It's part of the original design, in other words, it wasn't added later. And the last thing on that, that's the footnote, part of the meaning is that the one in Washington, we just talked about, the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial was inspired by this reflecting pool. And we don't have to guess that or assume that. Why? Because the architect of the Lincoln Memorial said that. He went to India and spent weeks studying this site, sketching it, drawing it, photographing it. I'm sure it was in the 1920s, so they couldn't take it a camera. Anyway, he took many images, for his inspiration to design that reflecting pool that's in front of the Lincoln Memorial. So, of course, this is an example of a Muslim invention or idea that spread all around the world. There are reflecting pools on every continent now, but they started in Muslim cities in Persia and then spread from there to the rest of the Islamic world and then beyond. And then the final thing I always like to mention is if you've seen the Disney, isn't it Aladdin? Is it Aladdin? Oh, yeah, Aladdin. No, I'm not thinking of Aladdin. It's the whole new world. I'm gonna sing it with that song. Yeah, it is Aladdin. Okay, I was thinking it was something else. No, it is. I'm mixing the two things as though we're separate. Yeah, the Disney cartoon version, and then didn't they do a live? I think they did a live action version of it. You might think if you saw, don't write this until I summarize the last fact in one sentence, and we'll do the formal analysis and we'll be done. Is that the onion domes might look to you as though they must have been a Muslim invention. No, they're a Russian invention. They were first used on Russian Orthodox, well, at the time, they were just Greek Orthodox churches in Ukraine, which was a separate country before there was a Russia, despite what Putin wants to say. And that's the southern part of what was then later taken over, of course, by the Russians when they conquered it. So in other words, I've seen them. I've been all over Ukraine, and they are over 1,000 years old, the Onion Dome churches in southern Ukraine, and then they were eventually also up in the north. They're 1,200 years old in Ukraine and 1,000-year-olds. I've been inside them. So the dome, the Onion Dome, is not a Muslim invention. The only thing in this slide is not indigenous to or invented by Muslim artists or architects. They were imported or borrowed from Russian, or you could say, Eastern Orthodox churches. That's not far away. Look at the mountain range between them. They're almost border over southern Russia and India, very close together. Okay, so that's the whole meaning. Let's do a formal analysis. And I will start with the fact that this is unusual in one way. It's a typical mosque in that it has, well, I guess you could say this is more of the meaning still. It doesn't have any living creatures. Remember, that's part of the meaning of any slide of a mosque. It has Arabic prayers, that's where the cursor is, right? And no living creatures or images of living creatures anywhere inside or out. So it's just plant motifs, right? And then up here, it's just geometric designs, like all mosques, okay? And then it has minarets, but we already know what those are. Tall, narrow, round prayer towers. 4 make it a royal mosque. So those things and the pointed arches are all classically Islamic features found on all mosques. Just about all mosques, the pointed arches almost everywhere. Okay, the reflecting pool is more specific to this period than to first Persia and then later India in mosques. Okay, and so we'll do each of the formal elements. We'll start with one feature that is different as part of the space. If you're looking at the largest masses, we'll do that first, masses. The largest mass is actually the base. Most mosques are not on a raised base, but the ones in India more often, because of monsoon rains, right, and flooding, often are. So it's a 30-foot tall base, okay, which makes this the largest mass, and then 100-foot tall interior to the peak of the dome, roughly rounding up about 100 feet, and then about a 30-foot finial. See there, the finial is quite tall. So if you add those together, you've got about 150 or a little over 150 feet from the foundation, or you could say the ground or base, to the top of the finial, the real space. It's a large open domed space with smaller side rooms.
How large is the finial again?
Say it again. The base is 30 feet high, and that's not part of the mosque, of course. The interior of the mosque is 100 feet from the floor to the top of the dome. So you just write it that way. The interior space from the floor to the peak of the dome is about 100 feet. And then the finial above it is about another, actually, it's more like 20 feet. Yeah, 20 feet. So the total height, in other words, if you want to write it that way, is 30 plus 100 plus 20. It's 150 feet from the ground to the top. I'm rounding off the top of the finial, and that's the real space. But you should mention, if it's on the essay part of the exam, that the interior space, the large open domed room, is the main space inside, is a height of from the floor to the top of the dome of about 100 feet. Okay, then the largest mass, I was sort of overlapping those, so I'll say it again, is the base. I used to say it was the outer walls, but that is a massive base, and it's very wide and long. You can see that. It goes way around the whole thing. So that's the largest mass. It's part of the original design. Then the main walls, and then the central dome in that order. And then we have the rhythm, of course. The minarets obviously create rhythm. The onion domes, even though they're not absolutely Islamic, they're used on many Muslim buildings, of course, not just mosques. And then the pointed arches, those are really powerful rhythm. And then finally, the carved decorations of plant motifs, Arabic prayers, and geometric patterns create rhythm on the exterior. And then the texture is the real smooth texture of marble. It's white marble. And the real smooth texture of glass. These are windows. They let in light. They're not, again, for you to look out, but it's glass. So that's the real smooth texture of glass. And you could say there's a third, again, real, not simulated texture of metal on the finials. It looks like bronze to me. I can't tell what kind of metal. You don't need to know. You can just say smooth, real metal, smooth, real glass, and smooth, real marble. Marble, of course, one of the few stones that is smooth. And this is all marble. Now, the modeling is a very important part of this. It's a conscious design element, which makes the building look lighter than it really is. I've actually heard people say who stood in front of it, watched the sun pass over the building for hours. Sometimes we'll just spend all day here, picnicking or walking and, sitting on their benches here somewhere in the garden. And they just want to see how beautiful it is at different times of the day. So what you should write is just that the shadows or modeling, of course, is created by deeply recessed niches, or you could say arches, but the niche is the space underneath the arch. And those are not just a side effect, they're part of the design. So there is modeling as a technique in the design of this building, which is where the main shadows. Otherwise, the whole thing during normal sunlight, is very cool and bright, of course, white marble. There's nothing warm here, unless you count the central finial, I guess you could say that. But otherwise, everything from the foundation to the top of the dome is a cool white color. I think I mentioned that the lines are, well, I didn't actually, the lines are both visual on the arches, or the niches with the top of the arches, and carved line. So visual line there, and then carved line up above on the walls, on all of the patterns of the prayers, the plant motifs, and the geometric patterns. That's all carved line. And then let's see, stable on the corners, as it always is. Remember, the minarets are always going to be both round, but tall and straight towers. So the minarets are both stable and dynamic. The base is stable. The walls are stable, but the arches or niches, actually just say the niches, the whole space, those are dynamic, as are the domes, of course. I believe it's 4 domes. I think there's 2 behind each of these, or 1 behind each one. But all you can see is the 3 in the front. So they each have a dynamic curve to the domes. Okay, let's see. Am I forgetting anything? Balance. I think well, no, I don't think I did that. It's balance left to right, obviously including the placement of the minarets, right? The walls, totally symmetrical like all mosques, but it's clearly unbalanced toward the bottom because obviously the main dome and these 2 smaller ones are much narrower than the bottom part, let alone the wide base. So it's completely unbalanced toward the bottom. Whereas the reflecting pole in front is balanced both ways. Draw a line down the middle, side to side or end to end, it's going to be balanced. I think it's over 100 some feet long here. Okay, we've covered, let's see, I think that's all the elements, right? I did texture. Yeah. All right. So we're about where I thought we would. We're about 10 or 12 minutes earlier than usual. So I'm going to go ahead and, unless there are any questions about this again, because I know that's a lot to write and you won't have to remember everything. Just if it's on the final 6 of the 9 elements I just went over, which hopefully you got all the notes for, right? And 6 of the facts about the meeting. I'm sure I gave you at least more than twice that. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share here. And go ahead and stick around if you have questions, of course. Now's a good time. Hang on, it didn't take, did it? There we go. All right, any questions you guys have, now's a good time to ask about anything we just covered or what we talked about on Monday or extra credit or grading or any other topics relating to this semester. Anybody have any questions you need answered?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I wanted to know if you had received my email, just so that I know that that email works out for the grading things.
Oh, which one? Is it? Is it Rachel Jimenez?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't see it yet. I did find a couple of people's in the spam. Oh, no, one in this class and one in one of my other bigger classes, the evening class, Zoom class. So I will always do that. But if you, when did you send it? That's an important fact.
I can check right now.
Yeah, it would be helpful because I can check after this class, not while everyone's sitting and, listening for questions about other things. Once I sign off, I will check my email quickly. And if I see it, I will respond and tell you I got it. But of course, I have another class to teach in a little while.
So I have like a weird email, but I put my name in the subject and in the message and then sent it to both emails.
What time did each of the two of you send your messages, I guess?
I mean, no, that's the thing. So I have a weird email, but I did get a grade like right on time. So I just made it very clear and sent it to both emails.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's Quinn, right? You said you did send. Oh, you did.
Yeah, I'm saying I have like a weird name that doesn't really correlate to like, or
What
weird
is it?
email.
Yeah, I'll write it down.
Is it the mighty qtip@gmail.com?
Yeah, I've seen that one. I think that one I might remember. It's distinctive enough, and plus
There's a Q in there.
exactly one letter at least overlaps with. Okay, so it could have gotten spammed out, but what time did you send it? Now, what was it you sent? Just a question?
Oh, I'm saying, yeah, like it all worked out. Like everything was right on
Oh,
time.
you did get your
I got a
grade.
grade.
Yeah, because that's what I have down. It didn't bounce back. Yeah, I always make a note of which ones I've sent and who got. Okay, so Rachel Jimenez, what time did you send yours? And did you get your grade for the midterm? Because
No, I haven't received any. I just sent it from like I tried a new email and I sent it on Friday at 10 a.m.
oh, okay. What was in that email and how did you label it? So I'm going to look and see if I got. Whether
I put grades, and then it was about how I haven't gotten any of my papers, but I was sending.
Okay. I'm glad you're doing. That's what we're here for. You got. I can't tell you what. That's not kosher because it's now too much specific detail. It's a privacy issue at our college and most. To tell you the exact grade, but you did quite well on your paper, and I have it marked that you received it. That's what it says. It was received. In my system, that's why I use my AOL. Don't laugh. Most will say, "Oh, that's the oldest website. Why would you keep using it?" Because it's easier to navigate than Outlook by far. And I'm not the only person that's ever said that. And also, I have it set up in an app called Executive Functions, which tells me those emails where they match your name. That's why I say thank you, Quinn. Now we resolved that. I won't have an issue with yours. But when people don't do that, I don't always know who got those or even which email address to return. But I have it marked that I returned your grade for your short paper. But let me just double check here. Also for your midterm. And so you didn't get those. Maybe they got spammed out at your end. So if I were you, if you didn't already do this, could you double check your own spam folder first? Then you said you already sent me an email. Then you don't have to send another one if.
Yeah, it's because I think we talked about it last class, and it was because my other email, my original one, had gotten like full, and so I hadn't received.
That's right. You did tell me
so
that.
I sent my new email that I could use.
Oh, so it went to your. Oh, I got it now. Okay, so I'm going to make a little notation here because I was looking for your emails yesterday, but I was in the middle of finishing. I had a deadline for a publisher, and those deadlines you don't want to miss. Publishers have plenty of other people that they can have write something for them. If you miss your own deadline, they just give it to someone else. So I had to get that, and it was around 4:35. I didn't check my email again, and I just did today, but I didn't have time to look closely. When did you send that, Rachel?
I sent the new email on, I think, April 1st at 10 a.m.
Oh,
just to let you know that I was going to use a new email so that you could actually receive
that might have gotten spammed out then. Maybe it did. Yeah. Shoot, and I checked my spam folder, and if I didn't recognize it was you, I might have deleted it because I can't. My spam folder fills up pretty. I have a very high spam filter, and that's always part of the reason I use AOL. If you don't, you get several hundred useless emails every day and you have to delete each one. Don't have time for that, as I'm sure none of you do. So I'll check again, but I'm thinking that, if I don't see it, I can't do it now. I'll do it in about whenever we finish. I'll make a quick check. I made a note next to your name, but both, you got good scores on both your tests. That doesn't matter though to you. Now you want the exact point you got. Obviously you deserve that confirmation. So I'm not sure if I don't see an email from you, if it's not also in my spam folder, then maybe you want to resend. If let's put it this way, if you don't hear from me by tomorrow at noon, I don't know whether you're busy on Thursdays, or let's say at least by 2 early afternoon, whatever, that I got those two. I mean, I got your correct email address and I forwarded it to you. If you don't get that confirmation from me and the actual grades, then one more time, send me an email, and this time make sure it says in the tagline why you're sending it, and in the actual text, what 2 things you're looking for. I guess it's both your first paper and your midterm. Like I said, you did well on both. But
Yeah, thank you. There's absolutely no rush as well. I just wanted to.
no, I'd rather get it off my plate and get it into your inbox. And so
Okay,
that,
thank
yeah, because then I'll know what your new email handle is, I hope, after this. Because you got your second paper due in about 2 weeks, remember? Okay, any other questions? So Quinn, that I think resolved your issue, right? Based on what you just told me. And I don't think I'll forget. But anybody else, now's the time to ask if you have any questions about anything related to grades, emails. Don't forget your second paper. Let's just finish up with that last thing before we sign off here. The due date for that is April 20th. Yeah, it's 2 weeks from today. So you should have picked a topic. And if not, you definitely want to do that very, very soon and get started on the research. So remember, you have the right to send me a sample of your part or all of your, but you have to say that if you're sending it in early, I might assume you're just submitting the final draft early, unless you say in your email, this is a semi-final draft, or this is my, preliminary, whatever you want to call it, draft. So please, could you give me feedback? Well, then I will do that. And so before, but don't wait till the day before it's due. You got to give me at least 48 hours. Otherwise, if you know how to write, you got an A on your first paper, you probably don't need to do that. And then your deadline is midnight on April 20th, 2 weeks from today. Okay, any other questions? We covered quite a bit here. Anybody else? Okay, you guys, hope you found that interesting. And like I said, pay a special attention to when you're studying for the final, the notes you took on the Taj Mahal. Okay, any last call?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
See you
Thank you.
on Monday.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you Monday. Have a good week. Yeah, take care. Bye.